Well, this morning I'm going to be talking about the oneness of mind. Amanda, who was a young mother, awoke one night about 2:30 in the morning, and she'd had a terrible, terrible nightmare. She dreamed that this large chandelier that was hanging over her baby's bed in the next room had fallen into the crib and crushed the child. In the dream, she and her husband stood over this wreckage in the room, and she saw a clock that was sitting on top of the baby's dresser, and the clock said 4:35 a.m. She looked outside in the dream, and the weather was violent. There was rain pounding on the window, and there was a gale of wind blowing. And the dream was so terrifying that she woke her husband up and she told him about it, and he just laughed, and he told her, it's just a dream, for God's sake. Go back to sleep, honey, go back to sleep. And he turned over and immediately went back to sleep. But the dream was so frightening that she couldn't do it. She went into the baby's room and she brought the child back into her bedroom, into bed with her. And she looked outside the window. The weather was fine, calm, peaceful, nothing going on outside. Well, she felt a little bit foolish, but she dozed off again. And about 2 hours later, she and her husband were awakened by a terrible crashing sound. And they dashed into the nursery, and sure enough, that chandelier had fallen into the crib and demolished it. It was in pieces on the floor. Amanda glanced at the clock, and the clock on the baby's dresser said 4:35 a.m. She looked outside, and the wind was howling. There was rain beating on the window pane. This time, however, her husband was not laughing. Amanda's experience was what we call a premonition. Now, these experiences are not unusual, actually. There have been surveys that have shown that 3/4 of the people in the United States of America have experienced what is termed ESP. 3/4 or more of the people in this room have experienced extrasensory perception, ESP, of some kind. And there are a number of different kinds, like a premonition in a dream, that you wake up and you have seen this awful thing or very wonderful thing happening. Sometimes premonitions occur when we're awake, but they occur in a different way. It manifests as kind of a hunch or just a gut feeling that something is going to happen. Now, if biologists want to know why certain traits happen in an animal or a person, they always ask, what good is it for? I mean, what purpose does it serve? Because unless it serves a purpose, then you begin to wonder whether that's a real thing. Premonitions often seem to warn about some kind of a danger that the person is going to be in, or another person might be experiencing, perhaps a natural disaster, maybe even a health challenge that this individual has, something that might impact them in a very negative way. But they're certainly not usually as clear and as frightening as Amanda's nightmare. They're more like a nagging feeling, just something's not quite right, and you have that sense. Or on the other hand, you might on an impulse do something that is really not typical of your doing. You just take a wild hair and do something, and it turns out to be such a blessing. You don't know why you changed your mind or did something different. It wasn't a conscious decision. You just did it, and voila, just wonderful things came of it. I'm sure that many of you have heard the phone ring and somebody's name or their face flashes into mind, even though you might not have heard from them in months and months. And sure enough, it's the very person that popped into mind. Or maybe you have what my daughter calls good parking karma. You have a knack for being able to find the last clear space in a parking lot that's already full. And it manifests in so many different ways. But experiencing a premonition or an intuition or hearing about someone who has tells us very clearly that we are an integral part of something that is much larger than we are. We are connected with every consciousness, every other consciousness that's ever existed, that exists now, or will exist in the future. We are connected. Why? Because we are eternal beings, because we are made in God's image, because we are possessed of all His qualities, and because we are fully connected with Him. Now, there are lots of outstanding scientists who have realized this. The renowned physicist David Bohm, who was a protege of Albert Einstein, said this: each person unfolds something of the spirit of the other in his consciousness. And I have a feeling that other was capitalized. Now, the Nobel-winning physicist Erwin Schrödinger believed that, and I want to quote him: minds don't interact with one another like separate billiard balls, but are in some sense united and one. To divide or multiply consciousness is something meaningless. There is obviously only one alternative, namely the unification of minds or consciousness. In truth, there is only one mind. How wise Schrödinger really was. In 1885, Melinda Kramer, our founder, addressed the universe with these words: is there any way out of these conditions? Is there any power in the vast universe that can heal me? Her words must have been laced with a combination of determination and desperation, because she had lived the life of an incurable invalid for 23 years. The one mind responded immediately and impressively. Melinda experienced omnipresence. God within and God without, more real than life itself. God and all He is, everywhere present. God in all His power, with all His love and His life, was within her and was within everybody. Melinda believed in, she experienced and spoke about this one mind in which we all participate. She said that as God's children, we have all His qualities, all His inherencies. That's a divine science buzzword, inherencies. I personally don't, but maybe some of you might have some trouble in defining God, mind, as all wisdom, all understanding, all knowledge, universal love. You know, even if you don't remember ever experiencing that feeling, that consciousness, could you agree, perhaps, that it's perfectly logical that if we are God's image, if we are what He is, then at a certain level inside of us, we would probably say at the spiritual level, we are one with Him. We are connected inseparably with Him. Perhaps you've had the experience of you opened your mouth and said something, and it was much wiser than you. Now, this something didn't come through your mind. You weren't mentally preparing for saying this. In fact, your mind probably wasn't even in gear. What you said just came out of some kind of non-physical dimension within you that is one with the one mind, that knows all. But it came out of your mouth from God at a moment when it was needed, not planned on your part, but a gift from God. Think back and see if you can't remember and experience something like that. Some of the world's finest philosophers and scientists have begun speaking about this one universal mind. A man by the name of Freeman Dyson, he's a well-known physicist, put it this way: there is evidence that the universe as a whole is hospitable to the growth of mind. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe in the existence of a mental component of the universe. If we believe in this mental component of the universe, then we can say that we are small pieces of God's mental apparatus. Premonitions seem to reveal a beautiful dimension of God. His love for us, and that same love expressed through us to other people, because studies reveal that premonitions frequently link people who love each other, like parents and children, or siblings, or twins, lovers, or very dear friends. They will experience a premonition perhaps about another. A classic example is our friend Amanda, the young mother whose dream premonition saved her child's life. But studies have consistently shown that same pattern. When there is love, when there's empathy or compassion, a sense of connectedness with another person, it becomes an integral part of the pattern of premonitions that people have spoken about over a very long period of time. But if there might be some in the room that are still a little bit unconvinced, or somebody who's in our streaming audience, if you're still a little bit unconvinced, that we can sometimes peek into the future, if it still doesn't sound very real to you, let me tell you about some elegant research that has been done by Dr. Jean Radin, who works at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. It's been observed that the body's autonomic system responds more robustly to violent or sexual images than to calm, serene images. But the body responds even before the image has been randomly selected and shown on a computer. In other words, the body responds before the picture comes up. Something within us does know the future. Larry Dossey, back in the 90s, wrote a book called Reinventing Medicine. And in this book, he shared a precognitive dream about a patient that proved to be uncannily accurate. Well, he was invited to a live radio show to talk about the book. But unknown to Dossey, the host had also invited a very well-known cardiologist whose role was to debunk Dossey and his book. And while they were waiting, just in a little while before the radio program was about to come on, the cardiologist turned to Dossey and said, "Well, I have to tell you that I disagree with nearly everything you have in that book." That wasn't good news. Dossey just took a deep breath and tried to prepare himself mentally for the the onslaught that was going to come. Well, the radio host, as soon as this program started, immediately asked Dr. Dossi to relate his precognitive dream, the one that he had talked about in this book. And as soon as he finished, the radio host turned to the cardiologist and asked what he thought of this dream stuff. He expected fireworks. He expected fireworks immediately. But the cardiologist didn't respond. There was what do they say in radio, called dead airspace, and that isn't something you want. You don't want silence. The radio host started looking like he was about to have a panic attack. Finally, the cardiologist said, rather softly, I think I'd like to relate a dream that I had. I've never told anybody about this. And the cardiologist told of once having an elderly female patient who needed a cardiac catheterization. And the night before the procedure, the doctor, the cardiologist, had a dream that while he was doing this test, the patient became speechless, unconscious, and paralyzed on one side. In other words, she had a major stroke. He woke up and the cardiologist was rattled by this thing, but he just told himself, "Well, be sensible. It's just a dream, just a nightmare, nothing to be concerned about." So he went ahead with it. Later in the day, during the catheterization, this woman had a stroke in exactly the same pattern that he had dreamed about the night before. Although the woman recovered completely, the experience shook the doctor deeply. So during the rest of the program, they disagreed on nothing, much to the radio host's chagrin. Premonitions. They're a tiny peek into the future, designed to help us or a loved one, to save someone's life perhaps. But they can help us to deepen our faith in the truths that this church teaches. We are God's children. We were made in His image. We are one with the one mind that is all wisdom, all knowledge, all understanding, and all unconditional love.